October 31st, 2019. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been hiding in the Carpathian wilderness for 15 years, the woman who once played God with genetics. That's exactly why she didn't hesitate when she saw the pregnant werewolf falling. Elena rappelled down the cliff face in a howling storm, grabbed the creature's massive paw, pulled her to safety. The wolf should have ripped her throat out. Instead, it looked into Elena's eyes with ancient intelligence and spoke one word: mother. What happened in the next 12 hours changed everything Elena thought she knew about her past. The Vatican sent emergency teams because of it, and for 20 years, when people whispered about the Vasquez experiments, they always came back to this night. The night Elena discovered her greatest failure was her greatest success. The night she learned you can't kill what you've already perfected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wolf's amber eyes held Elena frozen against the cliff face, rain lashing her weathered features. In those depths, she saw something that made her blood turn to ice. Recognition. Not the wild awareness of a beast, but the calculated intelligence of something that had been waiting for her. "That's impossible," Elena whispered, her repelling gear creaking in the wind. The creature beneath her was massive, easily 3 times the size of any natural wolf, its silver-black fur matted with blood and rain. The swollen belly spoke of late pregnancy, perhaps days from birthing. The wolf's lips pulled back, revealing teeth like ivory daggers. When it spoke again, its voice was a guttural rasp that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. "You made us." Elena's grip on the rope faltered. "Made us." The words hit her like physical blows, dragging her back 20 years to sterile laboratories and screaming test subjects, to the night she'd fled Romania with blood on her hands and failure branded into her soul. "My experiments died," she said, more to herself than to the creature. "They all died." The wolf made a sound that might have been laughter. Death was just the beginning. Thunder crashed overhead as Elena hauled the creature up the final 20 feet to solid ground. Her muscles, strong despite her 58 years of mountain living, strained against the wolf's weight. When they finally collapsed onto the rocky ledge, both breathing hard, Elena found herself staring into eyes that held far too much knowledge. The storm that had been building all day unleashed its full fury. Through the sheets of rain, Elena could see the lights of her cabin a mile down the mountain, her sanctuary, her prison, her home for 15 years of self-imposed exile. She'd chosen this place specifically because nothing lived here except the wind and the occasional lost hiker. "You can't be real," Elena said, rain streaming down her face. "I destroyed everything. Every sample, every backup, not everything." The wolf struggled to its feet, massive frame swaying. "He saved us. He saved what you threw away." "He?" The word came out as a croak, but the wolf was already moving, limping across the exposed ridge toward the old forest. After 3 steps, it stopped and looked back at Elena with an expression that was disturbingly human. "Come." He's been waiting. Elena knew she should run. Should grab her gear and disappear into the night. Maybe head for the Serbian border. Maybe finally book that flight to somewhere the shadows of her past couldn't reach. But the scientist in her, the part that had driven her to play God in the first place, wouldn't let her walk away. She followed. The wolf led her through pine forests so dense the storm's fury became a distant whisper. Elena's headlamp cut through the darkness, illuminating a path that seemed ancient, worn by countless feet over countless years. Strange symbols had been carved into the trees, not random scratches, but deliberate markings that made her skin crawl. After an hour of walking, they reached a clearing dominated by a massive stone structure that definitely hadn't been here 15 years ago. It looked like a fusion of Gothic cathedral and primitive cave system, as if someone had tried to impose human architecture on something fundamentally wild. "What is this place?" Elena breathed. The wolf didn't answer. Instead, it threw back its head and howled, a sound so pure and mournful it seemed to shake the very mountains. The howl was answered from within the structure, not by one voice but by dozens, creating a harmony that spoke of pack, of family, of things Elena had tried to forget. Torches flickered to life along the structure's walls as if ignited by invisible hands. In their wavering light, Elena could see movement, shapes that walked on two legs but moved with predatory grace, shadows that suggested human forms but wrong somehow, evolved beyond humanity's limitations. The massive doors of the structure opened with a grinding of stone on stone. The figure that emerged made Elena's knees buckle. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with the lean build of a dancer and the presence of something that had never known fear. His skin was pale as moonlight, his dark hair swept back to reveal a face that was beautiful in the way that sharp objects were beautiful, elegant and dangerous. When he smiled, Elena saw fangs, but it was his eyes that destroyed her. Dark brown eyes that she'd looked into every day for the first 18 years of his life, eyes that had trusted her completely when he'd volunteered to be her first human test subject, eyes that belonged to her son. "Hello, Mother," Miguel said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who ruled rather than served. "I've been expecting you." Elena's scientific mind catalogued the impossibilities before her, even as her heart shattered. The genetic modifications she'd attempted on Miguel 20 years ago had been a desperate attempt to save him from the degenerative disease that would have killed him before his 20th birthday. The serum had seemingly failed, and Miguel had disappeared from the laboratory the same night everything went to hell. Now she understood. Her son hadn't died from her experiments. He'd become something far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. Tomorrow, we dive deeper into Elena's laboratory of horrors and discover exactly what Miguel has been building in these mountains for 20 years. The Vatican won't be far behind, and what they're carrying will make your skin crawl. Make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss what happens when a mother faces the monster she created from love. The silence stretched between them like a chasm 20 years wide. Elena's scientific mind reeled, cataloguing impossibilities while her heart fractured with each breath. Miguel stood motionless in the torchlight, beautiful and terrible, waiting with the infinite patience of something that had transcended human limitations. "You died," Elena whispered, the words scraping her throat raw. "The serum failed. You convulsed for 3 hours and then—" She pressed her hands against her temples, trying to reconcile memory with reality. "Your heart stopped. I checked. I held you and your heart wasn't beating." Miguel's laugh was soft, almost fond. "Death is relative, Mother. You taught me that." He gestured to the stone cathedral behind him, where shadows moved with purpose. "You taught all of us." "All of us." The words hit Elena like ice water. Behind Miguel she could see them now, figures emerging from the structure's depths. They moved with predatory grace, some more human than others, but all carrying themselves with the confident bearing of apex predators. A woman with silver hair and golden eyes that reflected the torchlight, a man whose arms ended in claws that gleamed like polished obsidian. Children, dear God, there were children, whose faces held ancient wisdom despite their young features. They were her legacy, her damned, beautiful, impossible legacy. Elena's legs gave out. She sank to her knees on the rain-soaked stone, 20 years of guilt and grief crushing down on her like an avalanche. "The laboratory fire," she said numbly. "The bodies they found. I thought—" "You thought you'd killed us all." Miguel stepped closer, his movements fluid as water. "In a way you did. The humans we were died that night. But something better was born from the ashes." Elena forced herself to look up at her son. In the torchlight she could see the subtle changes that marked him as no longer human. His skin held a luminescent quality that seemed to glow from within. His features had sharpened, becoming more angular, more perfect. And his presence, there was a weight to it now, an authority that pressed against her mind like a physical thing. "I never meant for this," she said, her voice breaking. "Miguel, you have to understand. I was trying to save you. The genetic disorder would have—" Would have killed me before my 20th birthday, Miguel finished. I remember. I also remember volunteering, Mother. I chose this. His expression softened slightly. We all chose this. The pregnant wolf that had led Elena here limped forward, settling herself beside Miguel with a soft whine. This close, Elena could see the intelligence burning in those amber eyes, could see the subtle human characteristics that marked her as one of the evolved hybrids rather than a natural wolf. Luna's been watching you for months, Miguel said, resting his hand on the wolf's massive head. She wanted to approach you sooner, but I thought it was too dangerous. The Vatican's hunters have been getting closer. Elena's blood chilled. The Vatican knows about you. They've known for years. About us? Miguel's smile turned predatory. They're beginning to suspect, which is why we needed to bring you home before they found your cabin. Home. The word hit Elena like a physical blow. She looked around at the impossible architecture, at the hybrid creatures watching her with expressions ranging from curious to hostile, at her son who ruled over them like some dark angel. This wasn't home. This was a nightmare made manifest, a twisted fairy tale where the mad scientist's creations didn't turn against her, but welcomed her with open arms. I can't, she said, scrambling backward on the wet stone. I can't be part of this. Don't you understand what I've done? The people who died in the laboratory fire were already dead, Miguel said firmly. The failed experiments, the ones whose bodies couldn't handle the transformation. They were suffering, Mother. You ended their pain. Elena shook her head violently. I created abominations, monsters. The words hung in the air like a curse. Around the clearing, the hybrid creatures went very still. Elena could feel their eyes on her, could sense the sudden tension crackling between them like electricity before a storm. Miguel's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Look at me, Mother. Look at us. Are we abominations? He gestured to the silver-haired woman who stepped forward with fluid grace. Maria was dying of cancer when you gave her new life. She's been cancer-free for 20 years and has strength that would humble an Olympic athlete. He indicated the man with clawed hands. David was paralyzed from the waist down. Now he can tear steel with his bare hands. Elena forced herself to look, really look, at the creatures surrounding her. Despite their inhuman modifications, she could see no suffering in their faces. Instead, she saw purpose, community, a kind of fierce joy that she hadn't experienced since before the fire. We're not monsters, Miguel said softly. We're evolution. Thunder crashed overhead, and Elena realized the storm had followed them here. The storm's fury seemed to intensify with Elena's mounting horror, rain turning to sleet that struck the ancient stones like bullets. She was still on her knees, staring up at Miguel, when the sound reached them. A mechanical thrumming that cut through the thunder like a blade. Helicopters. Miguel's head snapped toward the noise, his enhanced senses picking up details Elena's human ears couldn't catch. Around the clearing, the hybrids melted back into the shadows with predatory swiftness, but not before Elena caught the fear flickering across their faces. How many? Maria asked, her voice carrying an accent Elena couldn't place. 3 birds. Military grade. Miguel's expression had shifted from welcoming to deadly serious. They're running silent approach patterns. Professional. Elena struggled to her feet, ice forming in her stomach. The Vatican hunters you mentioned? Worse. Miguel turned to her, and for a moment she saw not the supernatural king but her frightened son. Mother, did anyone know you were coming here tonight? Anyone at all? I live alone. I don't... Elena stopped, memory hitting her like a physical blow. The supply run to Brasov 2 days ago. The young priest who'd been asking questions about Americans living in the mountains. The way he'd looked at her when she'd paid for her groceries, like he was memorizing her face. The way he'd followed her to her truck. Oh God, she whispered, there was a priest. I thought he was just curious about foreigners, but... Miguel moved faster than her eyes could track. One moment he was 10 feet away, the next his hands were gripping her shoulders with inhuman strength. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I swear. I said nothing about—" She stopped, bile rising in her throat as the pieces fell into place. "But he saw me. He followed me part way up the mountain road, and if they've been watching my cabin, they tracked you here." Miguel released her, his face a mask of cold fury. 20 years of hiding and you led them straight to us. The helicopters were closer now, their rotors cutting through the storm with mechanical precision. Elena could see light sweeping across the tree line, hunting beams that turned the forest into a stark landscape of black and white. "I didn't know," Elena said desperately. "Miguel, I swear I didn't know they were—" "Doesn't matter now." Miguel spun toward his people, authority crackling around him like electricity. "Emergency protocols. Get the children to the deep caves. Maria, take Luna and the other expectant mothers down to—" The first spotlight hit the clearing like a small sun, turning night to blazing day. Elena threw up her hands against the glare, temporarily blinded. When her vision cleared, she could see the helicopters hovering above them. 3 black aircraft without markings, military grade as Miguel had said. Amplified voices boomed down from the sky, speaking in Latin that Elena's academic mind translated automatically. "By the authority of the Holy See, you are commanded to surrender. Dr. Elena Vasquez, step forward and identify yourself." They knew her name. They knew exactly who she was and why she was here. Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, not from the helicopter downwash, but from the terrible understanding that her old life, her careful, hidden, guilt-ridden existence, was ending whether she wanted it to or not. "Mother." Miguel's voice was urgent. "Whatever choice you make in the next 30 seconds will determine whether we live or die. All of us." Elena looked around the clearing. The hybrids hadn't fled despite the danger. Instead, they'd formed a protective circle around the children, around Luna and her unborn offspring, around each other. They moved with the coordinated precision of a family that had faced death before and chosen to face it together. Her family. The family she'd created and then abandoned. The voice from the helicopter boomed again. "Dr. Vasquez, you have violated the Concordat of 1874. Present yourself for judgment or face the consequences." Elena had never heard of any Concordat of 1874, but the threat in those words was unmistakable. These weren't researchers or government officials. They were executioners, and they'd come to finish what the laboratory fire had failed to accomplish 20 years ago. "I can get you out of here," Miguel said quietly. "There are tunnels, escape routes. You can disappear again, start over somewhere they'll never find you. But you have to choose now." Elena stared up at the helicopters, their spotlights turning her son and his people into stark silhouettes against the ancient stone. 20 years ago, she'd run from the consequences of her choices. She'd let the world believe her experiments were abominations that deserved to burn, had let herself believe it too. But looking at Miguel now, at the leader he'd become, at the community he'd built from her abandoned research, Elena realized she'd been wrong about everything. The helicopters were descending. Armed figures were already rappelling down into the clearing. There was no going back now. Elena's instinct was to run. Every cell in her body screamed for her to take Miguel's offer, to disappear into those tunnels and emerge somewhere far from this nightmare. She'd gotten good at running. 15 years of practice had honed it to an art form. "The tunnels," she said quickly, grabbing Miguel's arm. "Yes, get us out of here. We can—" "Dr. Vasquez." The amplified voice cut through the storm with surgical precision. "We know you're there. We can see your heat signature. Step into the light or we will consider your companions hostile." Elena froze. Around the clearing, she watched the hybrids react to that word, hostile, with a collective shudder that spoke of old terrors. Maria's golden eyes went wide with something beyond fear. David's claws extended involuntarily, scraping against stone. Even the children pressed closer together, their ancient wisdom unable to mask their very human dread. "What happens if they declare you hostile?" Elena whispered. Miguel's jaw tightened. Nothing survives hostile contact with Vatican hunters. Nothing. The first of the repelling figures touched ground. Black-clad soldiers carrying weapons Elena didn't recognize. Silver-edged blades that hummed with electric current. Guns that fired something other than bullets, judging by the strange crystalline chambers attached to their barrels. They moved with the coordinated precision of a unit that had done this before, many times. 30 seconds, Doctor. The amplified voice continued. We're not here to negotiate. Elena started toward the spotlight, but Luna suddenly lurched to her feet, positioning herself between Elena and the soldiers. The pregnant wolf's lips pulled back in a silent snarl, her hackles raised despite the obvious pain from her injured leg. It was David who spoke, his voice rough with emotion. They took Sarah 3 months ago. The words hit the clearing like a physical blow. Elena saw Miguel flinch, saw Maria press her hand to her mouth. Even the children seemed to shrink into themselves. Who's Sarah? Elena asked, though she was already afraid of the answer. My mate, David continued, his claws digging furrows in the stone. She was foraging near Zarnesti when their patrol found her. We heard her screaming for hours before. His voice broke. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. She looked up at the helicopters, at the soldiers advancing with their strange weapons, and suddenly understood. This wasn't a rescue mission or an arrest warrant. This was an extermination. 15 seconds. I won't let this happen again, Elena said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. She stepped toward the soldiers, hands raised. I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez. I'm coming out. Miguel caught her wrist with inhuman speed. Mother, no. You don't understand what they'll... I understand perfectly. Elena gently pulled free of his grip. They want me, not you. Maybe if I surrender, they want all of us dead, Miguel said flatly. You're just the excuse they needed to find us. Elena looked into her son's eyes and saw 20 years of hard-won wisdom, 20 years of protecting his people from a world that would destroy them without hesitation. She also saw something else, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, his mother might finally choose them over her guilt. But Elena's mind was already working, calculating angles and possibilities with the same methodical precision that had once made her a brilliant geneticist. There had to be a solution that didn't end with everyone she'd ever cared about dying in this god-forsaken clearing. Time's up, Doctor. The lead soldier raised his weapon, definitely not a conventional gun. The crystalline chamber began to glow with pale blue light that made Elena's teeth ache. Wait, she shouted, stepping fully into the spotlight. I said I'm coming out. But even as she spoke, Elena could see more soldiers spreading through the forest beyond the clearing. They'd surrounded the entire complex. Miguel's tunnels might buy them minutes, but not the hours they'd need to truly escape. The lead soldier kept his weapon trained on Luna, who hadn't moved from her protective stance. Dr. Vasquez, step away from the creatures and move toward our position. Slowly. Creatures. Not hybrids, not people, not even abominations. Just creatures. No more deserving of consideration than rabid animals. Elena took 2 steps forward, then stopped as a terrible understanding crashed over her. She turned back toward Miguel, her face pale with realization. They already know about the others, don't they? The ones who aren't here tonight. Miguel's silence was answer enough. How many communities? Elena pressed. How many places like this? 7, Maria whispered. There were 7. Past tense. Elena's knees threatened to buckle again as the scope of the slaughter became clear. They hadn't come here to stop her experiments. They'd come to finish cleaning up a mess that had been spreading for 20 years. The soldier's weapon hummed louder, the blue light intensifying. Elena looked at her son, at the family he'd built from her abandoned research, and made a choice that surprised them all. She stepped backward, placing herself between the soldiers and Luna's swollen belly. No, she said simply. The weapon discharged with a sound like breaking glass. The energy beam struck Elena in the chest with the force of a freight train, hurling her backward into the stone wall. Pain exploded through her ribs as she crumpled to the ground, gasping. But she was alive. Whatever those weapons fired, they weren't designed to kill humans instantly. They were designed for something worse. Where the beam had struck her, Elena's skin was already beginning to blister and smoke. The scent of burning flesh filled her nostrils as she struggled to breathe. But more horrifying than her own pain was Luna's agonized howl from behind her. The pregnant wolf was writhing on the ground, her massive form convulsing as silver burns spread across her flank where the energy beam had clipped her after passing through Elena. The hybrid's amber eyes rolled back, showing white, and Elena could hear the terrible sound of bones breaking as Luna's body began to shift involuntarily between human and wolf forms. The silver irradiation destabilizes their cellular matrix, the lead soldier explained conversationally, reloading his weapon with another crystalline chamber. Quite effective. The Vatican Science Division spent decades perfecting the formula after studying your original research notes, Dr. Vasquez. Elena's blood turned to ice water. My research notes were destroyed in the fire. The copies your assistant made weren't. The soldier's visor reflected the spotlight, hiding his face. Father Morrison was quite thorough before his unfortunate accident. 20 years we've been using your own work to hunt down your creations. Father Morrison. Elena remembered him, young, eager, always asking questions about the ethical implications of her research. She'd trusted him with her preliminary data, had even discussed the theoretical applications over coffee in her laboratory break room. He'd been copying her files, stealing them, and she'd never suspected. "You killed him," she whispered, tasting blood where she'd bitten her tongue. Father Morrison killed himself rather than face excommunication for heresy. His guilt over enabling your work became consuming. The soldier stepped closer, keeping his weapon trained on Luna's writhing form. His final confession was quite detailed. 7 communities of abominations, spreading like cancer through Eastern Europe, breeding, planning, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves to the world. Miguel's roar of fury shattered the night. Elena looked up to see her son's form beginning to shift, his careful human facade cracking as rage overwhelmed his control. Bone spurs erupted from his shoulders, his jaw elongated, revealing fangs that gleamed like polished ivory. The other hybrids were changing too, their survival instincts overriding 20 years of disciplined restraint. No. Elena struggled to her feet despite the agony in her chest. "Miguel, don't. That's what they want." But it was too late. The soldiers raised their weapons as one, blue light building in their crystalline chambers. Elena could see their satisfied expressions behind their visors. This was exactly the outcome they'd orchestrated. "Hostile creatures confirmed," the soldier reported into his radio. "Beginning sterilization protocol." Elena's mind raced through 20 years of suppressed memories, pieces of a puzzle she'd been too guilt-stricken to assemble. Father Morrison's questions about her test subjects, the convenient timing of the laboratory fire just as her experiments were beginning to show real promise. The bodies they'd found in the wreckage, too badly burned to identify, but the right number to account for all her subjects. "The fire wasn't an accident," she said, the words falling from her lips like stones. "You murdered them. You murdered my test subjects and made it look like my experiments failed." The soldier's pause was answer enough. "The early subjects were unstable," he admitted, "dangerous. But some were beginning to show signs of successful integration. The church couldn't allow that knowledge to spread." Elena's legs gave out again, but this time it wasn't from shock. It was from the crushing weight of absolute betrayal. For 20 years, she'd lived with the guilt of believing she'd killed innocent people through her arrogance. She'd hidden in the mountains, punishing herself for crimes she hadn't committed, while the real murderers had used her stolen research to hunt down the survivors. "The Concordat of 1874, she whispered, pieces clicking into place. "What is it really?" "A papal bull authorizing the elimination of threats to God's natural order," the soldier replied. "Signed after certain incidents in Romania revealed that some boundaries were never meant to be crossed. Your experiments violated the fundamental separation between human and beast that God established in Eden. Luna's convulsions were getting worse. Elena could see blood pooling beneath the hybrid's transformed body, could hear Miguel's anguished cries as he fought to reach his injured packmate while more soldiers closed in from all sides. 20 years of hiding, 20 years of self-imposed exile and crushing guilt. And all of it built on lies. Elena pressed her hand to the silver burn on her chest, feeling her own blood seep between her fingers. The pain was nothing compared to the fury building in her throat like molten metal. Her children, because that's what they were, all of them were her children, were dying because she'd been too broken to protect them. Not anymore. Elena's fury crystallized into something colder and more dangerous than rage. She pulled herself upright against the stone wall, her scientific mind cutting through 20 years of carefully constructed self-hatred like a scalpel through diseased tissue. "You said you've been using my research for 20 years, she said, her voice steady despite the silver burns eating through her chest. "But that's impossible." The lead soldier's weapon remained trained on Luna's convulsing form. "Your notes were quite comprehensive, Doctor. Father Morrison saw preliminary data. Theoretical frameworks." Elena stepped away from the wall, ignoring the agony that shot through her ribs. "The genetic sequencing protocols I used, the cellular integration techniques, those were locked in my personal files that were destroyed in the laboratory fire." She saw Miguel's eyes widen with understanding even as his transformed features fought to return to human form. Her son had always been brilliant. He'd grasped the implications before she'd finished speaking. "The Vatican didn't steal your research," Miguel said quietly. "They already had it." Elena nodded, pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "The Catholic University of Leuven. My fellowship supervisor, Cardinal Toretti. He had access to everything, my lab, my computers, my research protocols, from the very beginning." The soldier's weapon wavered slightly. "Doctor, you're clearly suffering from shock." "I'm suffering from 20 years of believing I was a monster," Elena snapped. "When the real monsters were the ones who sent me to Romania in the first place." She looked directly at the soldier's visor, seeing her own reflection distorted in its surface. "The church didn't just authorize my experiments, they designed them. Every parameter, every test subject, every ethical boundary I crossed was carefully planned by Vatican scientists." Luna's convulsions had slowed, but Elena could see the hybrid's breathing becoming labored. Whatever the silver irradiation was doing to her cellular structure, it was spreading. The pregnancy that had seemed so miraculous hours ago was now killing her from the inside out. "You're wrong," the soldier said, but there was something forced about his certainty. The church would never sanction such abominations. The church sanctioned the Crusades, the Inquisition, residential schools. Elena's voice grew stronger with each word, 20 years of buried rage finally finding its target. "You think they'd hesitate to commission genetic research if it served their purposes?" She thought about Cardinal Toretti's final visit to her laboratory, 3 days before the fire. How he'd insisted on reviewing her progress personally. How he'd spent hours examining her test subjects, taking detailed notes about their development. How he'd seemed particularly interested in Miguel's remarkable stability and intelligence. How he'd asked whether she thought her techniques could be refined. "They weren't trying to create a new species," Elena whispered, the final piece clicking into place. "They were trying to create weapons. Enhanced soldiers for the church's private army. Beings strong enough to hunt supernatural threats, intelligent enough to follow complex orders, loyal enough to serve without question." Miguel's face had gone deathly pale. "The other communities. The ones they've already destroyed. They weren't just eliminating evidence. They were field testing their extermination protocols." 20 years of research, Elena continued, her scientific mind now working with crystalline precision. 20 years of studying how my hybrids think, how they move, how they fight. Learning their weaknesses, developing weapons specifically designed to exploit their enhanced physiology. The soldier raised his weapon higher, the blue light intensifying. "Enough speculation, Doctor. You've delayed the inevitable long enough." But Elena was beyond caring about weapons now. The truth had set something free inside her chest, something that had been caged by guilt and self-doubt for 2 decades. She looked at Luna's writhing form, at Miguel's desperate attempts to reach his packmate, at the children huddled together in the shadows. Her children, all of them, created by her research, abandoned by her cowardice, hunted by her former colleagues. "You want to know the beautiful irony," Elena said, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. "Your precious Concordat of 1874, your divine mandate to preserve God's natural order, it was written in response to vampires and werewolves that already existed. Creatures that had nothing to do with science or genetic manipulation. You've been fighting nature itself for over a century." The soldier's grip on his weapon tightened. "That's heresy. That's biology." Elena stepped toward him, her burned chest screaming with every breath. "And you just proved my point. Your entire worldview is built on the arrogant assumption that anything you don't understand must be evil, that anything beyond your control must be destroyed." She gestured toward Luna, whose convulsions had finally stopped but whose breathing remained dangerously shallow. "Look at her. Really look. She's carrying the future of an entire species, and your response is to murder her because she doesn't fit your narrow definition of God's plan. She's an abomination. She's pregnant," Elena snarled, and for the first time in 20 years, she felt truly alive. The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before God himself. Elena felt something fundamental shift inside her, a tectonic plate of conviction sliding into place after 20 years of guilt-induced paralysis. The soldier's weapon hummed with lethal intent, but for the first time since the laboratory fire, Dr. Elena Vasquez was no longer afraid. "You want to talk about God's plan?" Elena continued, her voice gaining strength with each syllable. "Then explain to me how a pregnant mother protecting her unborn child violates divine order. Explain how Miguel building a sanctuary for the abandoned and hunted somehow offends heaven." She moved closer to Luna, ignoring the soldier's weapon entirely. The pregnant hybrid's breathing was becoming more labored, silver burns spreading like infection across her flank. Elena knelt beside her, placing her hands on Luna's swollen belly with the same gentle precision she'd once used to comfort her human patients. "I can feel them," Elena whispered, her scientific training warring with something deeper, more primal. 3 heartbeats, triplets. She looked up at Miguel, seeing 20 years of careful leadership cracking under the weight of impending loss. "They're strong, Miguel. Even with the silver poisoning, they're fighting to survive." The lead soldier's radio crackled with impatient voices from the helicopters above. "Ground team, report status. Sterilization should be complete by now." Elena's hands moved across Luna's distended abdomen, feeling the frantic movement of unborn life, responding to their mother's distress. These weren't abominations or weapons or theological mistakes. They were children, no different from the human babies she'd delivered during her brief stint in obstetrics 40 years ago. "The Vatican made one critical error in their calculations," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "They assumed my research was about creating soldiers, but I wasn't trying to make better killers. I was trying to cure genetic diseases." Miguel's transformed features began returning to human form as understanding dawned. The neurological stability protocols, the enhanced healing factors. "You weren't weaponizing us. I was trying to save you." Elena's eyes filled with tears she'd held back for 2 decades. "All of you. Every test subject who volunteered, who trusted me with their lives. You weren't experiments, you were patients." David stepped forward from the shadows, his grief over Sarah's murder temporarily overshadowed by revelation. "The children who were born sick, the ones who survived because of enhanced immunity. Medical miracles," Elena finished, "not military applications. The church took my research to cure genetic disorders and perverted it into a crusade against anything they couldn't control." Luna's amber eyes flickered open, focusing on Elena with desperate intelligence. The hybrid's lips moved, struggling to form words through her transformation-locked throat. Elena leaned closer, her ear nearly touching Luna's muzzle. "Save them," Luna whispered, each word a monumental effort. "Promise." Elena's scientific mind catalogued Luna's symptoms with clinical precision: cellular destabilization, organ failure, immune system collapse. The silver radiation was designed to trigger a cascade reaction that would kill any hybrid within minutes. But Elena's original research hadn't just created enhanced beings, it had given them remarkable regenerative capabilities. Capabilities that might be enough. "I need 20 minutes, Elena said, looking directly at the soldier's visor. "Let me save the children, and I'll surrender without resistance." "Negative. Sterilization protocol does not permit." "I'm not asking the church for permission," Elena interrupted, her voice cutting through the night like a blade. "I'm telling you what's going to happen. You can shoot me now and explain to your superiors why you let the next generation of hybrids die before they could be studied. Or you can give me 20 minutes to deliver these babies and guarantee the Vatican gets exactly what they've been hunting for 2 decades. The soldier's weapon wavered. Elena could almost hear his mental calculations, orders from above, tactical considerations, the political ramifications of returning empty-handed after 20 years of preparation. 15 minutes, he said finally. Then all hostiles are eliminated regardless of age. Elena was already moving, her hands examining Luna with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent decades pushing the boundaries between life and death. Miguel appeared at her side, his enhanced strength ready to assist however she needed. "The emergency surgical supplies," Elena said. "From my laboratory. And find me something to counteract silver poisoning, anything with high copper content." As Miguel raced toward the cave complex, Elena felt the weight of 2 decades lifting from her shoulders. She'd spent 20 years believing she was a monster who destroyed innocent lives. But monsters didn't fight to save pregnant mothers. Monsters didn't build sanctuaries for the forgotten and abandoned. Monsters didn't sacrifice themselves to protect the next generation. The church had created monsters. Cold, calculating killers who murdered families in the name of divine order. Elena Vasquez was something else entirely. She was a mother about to deliver her grandchildren into a world that would try to destroy them, and she would die before she let that happen. Elena's hands moved with surgical precision as Miguel returned with her emergency supplies, the familiar weight of scalpel and suture restoring 20 years of suppressed confidence. Luna's breathing had grown dangerously shallow, but the triplets' heartbeats remained strong, defiant life refusing to surrender to the Vatican's poison. "Hold her steady," Elena commanded, and Miguel's enhanced strength kept Luna motionless as Elena made the first incision. The soldier's countdown echoed in her mind like a death knell, but her hands remained steady. She delivered babies in war zones, in refugee camps, in conditions that would have broken lesser physicians. This was just another impossible situation demanding the impossible. 14 minutes, the soldier announced. Elena's fingers found the first infant, impossibly small, impossibly perfect. The baby's features shifted between human and hybrid, even as she lifted him free, his tiny hands already showing the elongated digits that marked her genetic legacy. He wasn't breathing. Without hesitation, Elena cleared his airways and breathed life into lungs that had never tasted air. The baby's first cry pierced the night like a battle hymn, and she saw several soldiers step backward involuntarily. Even through their visors, she could see their uncertainty. Whatever they'd expected from her abominations, it hadn't been the universal miracle of birth. "Miguel," Elena said quietly, placing the infant in her son's transformed arms. "Your nephew." The second baby came easier. A girl whose hybrid features were more pronounced, wolf ears pressed flat against her skull, eyes that gleamed with supernatural intelligence even moments after birth. She emerged already crying, already fighting, and Elena felt a surge of fierce pride. This child would never apologize for existing. 12 minutes remaining. Luna's pulse was weakening, the silver poisoning spreading faster now that her body was no longer protecting itself for the sake of her children. Elena worked with desperate efficiency, knowing she had seconds rather than minutes to save the third infant. Her fingers found tiny shoulders, a head crowned with impossible silver-white hair. But something was wrong. The baby wasn't moving. Elena pulled him free with practiced urgency, her medical training screaming warnings she refused to acknowledge. The third infant was larger than his siblings, his hybrid features more advanced, but he wasn't breathing, and his skin had a blue-gray pallor that spoke of oxygen deprivation. For 30 seconds that felt like hours, Elena fought death itself. Chest compressions that could have shattered human ribs. Rescue breathing that tasted of desperation. All the knowledge earned through 4 decades of medical practice focused on one tiny life that refused to begin. Then, a gasp, a cry. Eyes opening to reveal the same amber glow as his mother's. 10 minutes. Elena looked up to see soldiers repositioning around the clearing's perimeter, their weapons trained not just on the adult hybrids, but on the newborns in Miguel's arms. The lead soldier's posture had shifted from uncertain to resolved. Whatever brief mercy her demonstration had earned was evaporating. "Luna," Elena whispered, pressing her blood-slicked hand against the hybrid's cheek. "Your children are safe." Luna's eyes found Miguel, then the babies, then Elena. In that gaze, Elena saw 20 years of her own mistakes transformed into something approaching redemption. The pregnant wolf she'd saved from the cliff had become the mother who'd saved Elena from herself. "Thank you," Luna breathed, and Elena felt tears cutting tracks through the blood on her face. "I need to tell you something," Elena said, her voice carrying across the clearing to encompass all of them. Miguel, David, the children hidden in the shadows, even the soldiers whose weapons hummed with lethal intention. For 20 years I believed I was a monster. I hid in these mountains, punishing myself for deaths I thought I'd caused, for lives I thought I'd destroyed through my arrogance. She stood slowly, her burned chest screaming protest, but her voice growing stronger with each word. "But monsters don't love. Monsters don't sacrifice. Monsters don't spend 2 decades building something beautiful in the ruins of their mistakes." She looked directly at Miguel, seeing not the hybrid weapon the church had tried to create, but the son who'd become everything she'd hoped he could be. "I was never the monster in this story." 8 minutes. "The monsters," Elena continued, turning to face the lead soldier, "are the ones who would murder newborn children because their existence challenges a worldview built on fear and control." The soldier raised his weapon. "Dr. Vasquez, you will step away from the hostile creatures immediately." Elena smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in 20 years. "No," she said simply. And as the blue light in the soldier's weapon reached critical intensity, Elena Vasquez finally understood the difference between creating life and protecting it. She'd spent her career pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But here, now, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, she discovered something far more powerful than genetic manipulation. She discovered what it meant to be human. The blue light never fired. Elena stood motionless for 3 heartbeats, her body braced for death that didn't come. Around the clearing, soldiers shifted restlessly, their weapons still trained but their trigger fingers hesitant. She could see their faces now behind the visors, young men, most of them, following orders that suddenly felt less certain in the presence of newborn cries. "Stand down," came a voice from the lead soldier's radio. Not his commander, someone higher, speaking with the measured authority of Vatican halls rather than battlefield urgency. Elena watched the soldier's shoulders slump almost imperceptibly. 20 years of preparation, and it ended not with righteous fire but with political calculation. The church had what they'd come for: confirmation that her research lived, location data for future operations, genetic samples from the newborn's first breaths. The rest could wait for more convenient circumstances. "Dr. Vasquez," the radio voice continued, clearly audible in the mountain silence. "You will accompany our team for debriefing. Your subjects have earned a temporary reprieve." Elena looked at Miguel, still cradling his nephews and niece with the careful precision of someone who understood how fragile miracles could be. His amber eyes held a question she couldn't answer. How long would temporary last? Hours, days, until the Vatican scientists finished analyzing tonight's data. I understand, Elena said, surprising herself with how steady her voice remained. She'd spent 20 years running from this moment, and now that it had arrived, she felt oddly peaceful. The children were alive. Miguel's community would survive, at least for now. Sometimes that was all the victory the world allowed. But as the soldiers moved to escort her away, Elena felt Luna's hand close around her wrist with desperate strength. Not finished, Luna whispered, her amber eyes blazing with determination that should have been impossible for someone so close to death. The other communities, they'll come for them. Next. Elena knelt beside the dying hybrid, understanding flooding through her like cold mountain water. The Vatican hadn't just found Miguel's sanctuary. They'd been systematically locating every group of survivors across Eastern Europe. Tonight was just the beginning. The research, Luna breathed. Your real research, not what they think. Hide it. Elena's mind raced. Her original notes, her true objectives, the medical applications that had nothing to do with creating weapons, all of it was still hidden in her laboratory, coded in a notation system only she understood. If the church acquired those files, they'd finally comprehend what they'd actually commissioned 20 years ago. They'd realize they'd been hunting their own miracle. 6 minutes, Elena murmured, calculating distances and possibilities. Her laboratory was a 2-minute run through the cave system, another minute to locate the hidden drives containing her complete research. Then, "Doctor!" the lead soldier called. "Move away from the hostile." Elena looked at Miguel one final time, seeing her son's face but also the leader he'd become, the father he would be to children who might live to see a different world. She thought of all the words they'd never spoken, all the apologies that had come 20 years too late, all the love that had survived despite everything. "Take care of them," she said simply. Then Elena Vasquez did what she'd always done best. She ran toward the impossible. The soldiers' shouts followed her into the cave complex, but enhanced human speed was no match for desperate purpose and intimate knowledge of terrain. Elena's laboratory appeared before her like a shrine to abandoned hope. 20 years of exile crystallized in carefully preserved equipment and meticulously organized research. She found the hidden drives in 43 seconds. Everything she'd learned about genetic healing, about cellular regeneration, about bridging the gap between human limitation and supernatural possibility. Research that could cure muscular dystrophy, reverse Alzheimer's, give paralyzed children the chance to run. Research the Vatican would destroy rather than admit they'd commissioned. Elena clutched the drives to her chest as soldiers poured into the laboratory behind her. Through the cave mouth, she could see dawn beginning to touch the mountain peaks with gentle light. Somewhere in that growing brightness, Miguel was teaching 3 newborn hybrids their first lessons about survival. David was planning new defenses for communities that refused to die quietly. Children were waking up to another day of impossible existence. The soldier's weapon powered up behind her with familiar blue radiance. Elena Vasquez smiled, thinking of pregnant wolves and loving sons, and the difference between creating monsters and nurturing miracles. She'd spent 20 years believing she'd failed at playing God. She'd been wrong about that, too. The light embraced her like forgiveness itself.